and butchery tax, in addition to numerous other levies. In contrast, the urban population does not pay these taxes and fees. In a tree farm in eastern Sichuan province, upper-level authorities distributed 500,000 yuan for a reforestation project. The leaders of the tree farm put the first 200,000 yuan into their own pockets and allocated the remaining 300,000 yuan to tree planting. But, when passing through each level of the government, more and more of the money was taken away, and in the end very little was left for the peasants who did the actual tree planting. Those in the government didn't need to worry about the peasants refusing to work on the project, though. The peasants were so impoverished that they would work for very little money. This is one of the reasons that products made in China are so cheap. Many people believe that trade with China will promote human rights, freedom of speech, and democratic reform in China. After more than a decade, though, it is clear that this assumption is only wishful thinking. A comparison of the principles of doing business in China and in the West provides a good example. The fairness and transparency of Western societies are replaced in China by nepotism, bribery, and embezzlement. Whether China decides to buy new aircraft from France or the United States depends on which country keeps quiet on the CCP's human rights issues. Many Western businessmen and politicians are driven and controlled by economic profits from China. Some information technology companies from North America have supplied specialized products to the CCP to block the Internet. In order to gain entry to the Chinese market, some Internet websites have agreed to censor themselves and filter out information disliked by the CCP. This huge blood transfusion to the CCP economy from foreign capital is very apparent. But in the process of investment, foreign capital did not bring with it the concept of democracy, freedom, and human rights as fundamental principles for the Chinese people. In its propaganda, the CCP boasts about the unconditional cooperation and even flattery given by foreign investors and foreign governments for the CCP. By making use of China's superficial economic prosperity, CCP officials have become extremely adept at colluding with businesses to divide state wealth and block political reforms. People are often heard to say, "I know the CCP often lied in the past, but this time it's telling the truth." Ironically, in retrospect, this was what people would say each time the CCP made a grave mistake in the past. This reflects the ability the CCP has acquired over the decades to use lies to fool people. People have developed some resistance to the CCP's tall tales. In response, the CCP's fabrication and propaganda have become more subtle and professional. Evolving from the slogan-type propaganda of the past, the CCP's lies have now become more refined and subtle. Particularly under the conditions of the information blockade the CCP has erected around China, it makes up stories based on partial facts to mislead the public, which is even more detrimental and deceptive than the tall tales. Consider how CCTV News reported on SARS in the beginning of April 2003.
在中国，中国人民的，包括广东人民的生活生产的秩序是正常的。
At that time, the outside world suspected that China had hidden information about the epidemic. But CCP reports told the following story. As soon as SARS appeared, governments at central and local levels mobilized experts to give timely treatment to patients, who were later discharged from hospitals upon recovery. Troublemakers have been frightening people into stockpiling goods to avoid having to go out if the disease becomes widespread. The government has wasted no time to stop these rumors and is taking steps to prevent their spread so that social order can be effectively ensured. A very small number of anti-China forces groundlessly suspect a cover-up by the Chinese government. Most countries and people do not believe these rumors, though. The upcoming Guangzhou Trade Fair will have the largest participation ever from businesses around the world. Tourists from overseas have confirmed that it's safe to travel in China. In particular, experts from the World Health Organization have publicly stated that the Chinese government has been forthcoming in cooperating and taking the appropriate measures to deal with SARS, so there should be no problems. And specialists gave the go-ahead in Guangdong province for field inspection by the WHO. That was the story they told. Under this kind of media atmosphere, everything seems transparent. The CCP appears to have acted responsibly to protect the people's health and had convinced the people that the CCP hadn't hidden anything. However, on April 20, 2003, the Information Office of the State Council announced in a press conference that SARS had indeed broken out in China, and thus indirectly admitted that the government had been covering up the epidemic. People then began to see the truth and understand the deceptive, villainous methods employed by the CCP. With respect to the general election in Taiwan, using the same subtle and refined approach, the CCP suggested that a presidential election would lead to disaster, a surge in the suicide rate, collapsing stock markets, an increase in so-called weird diseases, mental disorders, outmigration of the island inhabitants, family feuds, a callous attitude toward life, a depressed market, indiscriminate shooting in the streets, protests and demonstrations, a siege on the presidential building, social unrest, political farce, and so on. The CCP filled the heads of the people in mainland China with these ridiculous ideas on a daily basis in an attempt to lead them to believe that all of these calamities would be the natural result of an election, and therefore that China should never hold democratic elections. In today's Internet era, if you visit the CCP's official Xinhua website or the People's Daily Online, you will find indeed that there are quite a few reports that contain negative information about China. Firstly, this is because there is too much bad news circulating rapidly in China these days, and the news agency has to report these stories in order to stay credible. Secondly, the standpoint of such reports conforms with the CCP interests and CCP policy. That is, quote, minor criticism offers great help, unquote. The reports always attribute the cause of bad news to certain individuals, having nothing to do with the party, while crediting party leadership with any solution. The CCP skillfully controls what to report, what not to report, how much to report, and whether to have the Chinese media or the CCP-controlled overseas media report it. The CCP is proficient at manipulating bad news into something that can achieve the desired result of winning people's hearts. Many youth in mainland China feel that the CCP now offers a good degree of freedom of speech, and thus they have hopes for and are appreciative of the CCP. They are the victims of the so-called refined strategies of the iniquitous state-controlled media. Moreover, by creating a chaotic situation in the Chinese society and then giving it some media exposure, the CCP can convince people that only the CCP could control such a chaotic society and can thus manipulate the people into endorsing CCP rule. From live interviews to vivid cultural performances, from touching historical dramas to a great variety of life commentary programs, the CCP's brainwashing propaganda over the past 20 years has become more refined and subtle in cheating. And it is no wonder that so many Chinese have been misled. The CCP